My gun didn't fire. Huh? What?
If you've ever played Rainbow Six Siege and insta-logged into Habana, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, guys. Guys, today we're talking about the Type 89 by Tokyo Marui, the gas version. Before we get into that, ladies, gentlemen, and my oft forgotten, but not by me, Type 100s. Guys, this video, full disclosure, I am not sponsored by Tokyo Marui at all. I bought this with my own money. Ammunition and gas was provided by myself, so there's absolutely no affiliation with Tokyo Marui here. So we'll be able to give our honest thoughts about this thing. But before we get into that, we have to prove that this is an airsoft toy and not a real thing, especially because it's gas. As you can see here, the magazine is empty. It has a BB follower. Chamber is empty. We're gonna do a little bit of a cycle. This is another magazine we also have as well, a 30 rounder. As you can see, it is a toy. It is not real. Gun is on safe. Hammer down. And there's nothing in the chamber. So we are good to go. So the Type 89, I've made an unboxing video about this airsoft toy before, and I wanted to kind of give my thoughts about it after I've used this thing. I've used it only once at Tenku at an outdoor environment where it's about 20 degrees Celsius, so the weather is pretty good to use it. And I gotta say, it does have its issues as well as its benefits. So in Garand Thumb style, we're gonna go tip to butt on this thing and talk about each part, and hopefully this helps you guys now that we have shot maybe 1,000 rounds through this thing. So starting at the muzzle here, it is a proprietary flash hider and it can be changed out for anything you want, but I probably wouldn't want to do that because this thing is long enough. We have like almost a 16-inch barrel. This thing is almost as long as my M870 tactical shotgun. And considering that this is made for Japanese airsoft, where spaces are very tight, it isn't particularly viable for CQB and even some outdoor fields where angles are quite selective depending on how long your airsoft toy is. The outer barrel actually does have a little bit of play. Doesn't really affect gameplay that much, but if you are OCD like me, it kind of does piss you off. The gas block here is just completely mocked, nothing actually happening on this thing. And of course we have a crown style iron sight, which is actually quite clear and quite clean, combined with the aperture in the back here, which is adjustable for wind and everything like that. But in airsoft, it doesn't really matter because you're gonna be shooting 30 meters and the wind's gonna probably pick it up from there. So it's not exactly ideal to use that. So you can actually get an additional Tokyo Marui rail mount, so you can actually put an optic of your choice, and we'll talk about optics in a second. The handguard, let's talk about the handguard. So the real version of this thing was made during the Cold War era, 89. So they didn't really have, you know, Picatinny or M-Lock in mind when they were making this thing. And as a result, we get something that kind of looks like an FN-FNC, a AR-18, AK-5, whatever you want to call it. And it is quite reminiscent of that. And at the beginning, I thought that this was actually metal, but it actually turns out this is plastic. And as the weather has gotten colder, you could actually hear quite a bit of creak, which is something I vigilantly avoided when I was making a purchasing decision. And because this entire handguard is a heat shield, there is no mounting options for anything. No foregrip, no M-Lock, whatever, but you do see that I have one here. And the only reason that this is possible is because this is actually just a toy and doesn't actually heat up. Quite the opposite, it cools down. So it actually is possible to jerry-rig some M-Lock on here so you can put on a flashlight or whatever. Another thing about this handguard is that if you are a content creator of any sort and you want to make content on the Type 89 and get gameplay on it, you can see that it's going to be quite difficult to mount cameras or anything like that on here. So what you could do is if you had a camera, you can get a barrel clamp with the Picatinny, put the scope cam on there, get a 45-degree angle offset, and then mount a selfie camera on here or whatever it might be. And then you can finally go from there. But for any content creator, it is quite difficult. You can actually disassemble this handguard quite easily by using a single retaining pin, and reveals the outer barrel and of course the gas piston here. And as you can see here, it does have some play because there's a little bit of a tiny crack on here. And actually you can see through the gas tube that the piston actually moves. It's an actual functional thing. And before we put it back together, the hop unit is actually right underneath the outer barrel, and that's gonna be the first issue. When I first loaded this thing at the field on a mountain, the hop was exceptionally strange. Using the 20-round magazine, I was actually able to get this thing to shoot 35 meters, no problem, on max hop. And then when I used one of my older magazines, my older M4 magazine, 30-rounder, with more gas, more pressure, in theory, it would just completely flop, barely reaching 20 meters. And then I borrowed my friend's MWS magazines, which were newer, and the thing was shooting at 35. So whether or not it was the magazine that was kind of causing issues, or the actual hop up causing issues, I don't really know. Over time and during the day, as the weather got a little warmer, I didn't really notice the difference, but having that inconsistency in range, you know, it's not a good feeling to have, especially when you got one life game modes and your airsoft life depends on it. So that was the first issue. The hop, there's something wrong with it. I don't know what it was. It actually sticks out quite a bit compared to the MWS. It's like a huge, huge bump. But even if you didn't put it on max and just put it around the middle area, it would still be a little bit inconsistent. So let's move on to the receiver. It's just a simple Cold War-esque receiver, has 89R in it, has the JSDF, Japan Self-Defense Force symbol on it, has a serial number. What I want to talk about is the bolt carrier system. So as you can see here, it is a reciprocating charging handle. And this thing is actually quite easy to manipulate. It does have some textured grooving on the other side, so it's easy to manipulate, easy to release the bolt. And on empty, when you pull it, it does lock back like this. And you can release it with either the Glock style paddle or like a boss by pulling back like that. I ended up using this motion more as my movements were more deliberate because the Glock style paddle is not a push button, it's actually a push down button. So when you're under stressful situations, being able to just you take your trigger finger off and just pull this over is a lot easier physically than it is to kind of get the fine motor skill to push down, but that does require training, of course. So I want to talk about this takedown now. It is exceptionally difficult to take this down in the middle of battle. Usually when my airsoft rifles purge the gas or have a jam and I need to take it apart, the M4, super easy, 2 pins, pop it out, pull it out, okay. AKM, take off the dust cover, pull that thing out, and then you just check what's wrong. With this thing, it is quite the process. So you have to start by pressing this button here, lifting up the receiver like this, taking off the dust cover. There's like a little tiny release button at the bottom. You could take out the spring. Then you have to pull this out. Then you can take out the AK style bolt. And to do that on the field, pretty annoying. You wouldn't want to do that. You'd probably lose some parts. So again, this was made in the Cold War. So you have to have a backup weapon system to use this Type 89 if it does go down. And I want to talk about that right now, is how unreliable this thing was on the field. So when I was using this thing, and I'll throw up some footage as well, I experienced a large amount of malfunctions.
Oh, shit. My gun didn't fire. What? Huh? What?
Whether it was double feeding, BB jams, or gas purges, every other round I was using this rifle, there was something wrong with it. Let alone the hop, let alone the range, let alone the magazine. It was absolutely a nightmare to use this thing, and I could not rely on it for my airsoft life. And that's surprising because this is a TM and it's a TM gas. And I was very disappointed because I just got it. I only used it 2 days before, barely, just for testing, and it was failing me. And for some reason, my airsoft toys always fail me on the actual airsoft day rather than at home where I can diagnose things. So that was an issue. And it turns out that that issue was TM's fault and partly my fault as well. So what ended up happening is that my bolt carrier system here, so this part over here actually ended up breaking. Now, whether or not it was a manufacturer defect or it's because I was reloading too hard or mag tapping so hard, I don't know, but I did end up getting it fixed. But that was one of the main issues of why my thing was double feeding, why it wasn't consistent, and why the hop wasn't working, because I got a pretty much bad product, a bad batch. So they replaced it for me for free, fortunately. You just gotta be a little bit gentle with this thing. And it's kind of hard to do reloads because of this mag well being so shallow. To get that magazine in there requires a lot of precision. Sometimes you'll put it in and you don't know if it's seated in properly or not. So you have to kind of give it a mag tap. But by tapping that magazine, you risk breaking the extractor. And this is one of the reasons I don't want to use this rifle anymore, because I don't know whether or not it's going to break on me. But it's been okay for now. Let's talk about the magazines. This thing can barely finish an entire magazine of 20 rounds. If you full auto this thing, it's gonna fart. If you burst fire this thing, it's gonna fart. And it gets cold very, very quickly. And I'll show you a quick example. I've got a little bit of gas in here. It's about 20 degrees inside this room, maybe 21. You can see that it's already kind of dying there. And that is not ideal. That combined with the limited range and stuff is not ideal. Whereas you have the 30 round magazine, I'm out of gas, but it felt a lot better. So that is also an issue with this thing. Maybe it's the way this Type 89 runs its bolt or its efficiency or the recoil or whatever. Having that amount of farting with your gas gun that early in the game is not ideal. So I can only imagine using this thing in the hottest days of summer, but when it starts to get a little bit cooler, you're gonna struggle really quickly with this thing. And on that topic, let's talk about the recoil. So the recoil is not as much as the M4, as the bolt is actually traveling only up to the receiver and not into your shoulder with the recoil spring. So the recoil is felt more around here on the receiver. It's a completely different impulse and it doesn't beat into your shoulder. However, I will say it is very loud. But other than that, it leaves a lot to be desired. Now, let's talk about the fire selector. Very, very unergonomic, if that's a word. So the safety is actually at the top here, and then down is full auto, then 3-round burst, then semi-auto. So this is not gonna be a rifle where you're constantly flipping the safety on and off because you're not allowed to use full auto in most fields in Japan. So if you wanted to do that safety manipulation, it's a whole technique to spin it around to semi-auto. So what I ended up doing is just leaving it on semi-auto and going from there. When I reload, put it back, blah, 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 set it back up, or just leave it as is. But the 3-round burst is really fun. I think it's a lot better than the full auto. It is more consistent. It doesn't drain your gas as much and it doesn't get your mag as cold. Let's talk about the pistol grip. Nice and fat. Nice and smooth, does not cut into your finger like an M4 does. And it's very nice. It's actually quite nice. And there's actually a little storage space in here to put snacks or whatever you want in there. I don't know why anybody puts snacks in their pistol grip. That's such a weird thing. Very easy to manipulate and it gives you a very, very positive grip. So no complaints about that pistol grip. However, you cannot change it. Whether or not because of its proprietary design or there's just no aftermarket parts for it at this moment, you don't really need to anyway. It's actually quite nice. So let's talk about this trigger now. This trigger, and I've talked about it in the unboxing video, is very mushy. It's just like this really weird mush and then it clicks. So let's do this. Your hand over mine. Ghost is trigger, guys. A little bit of play. Very hard play, very hard wall right there. Try that again. Yeah, there's a lot of travel distance. Very, very long, swampy, mushy wall. It's not a hard wall. It's like you got to travel and then you go through these murky waters. And how about that reset? Very fast reset. Almost instant. So that travel distance right up to here. And then you can shoot really quickly. So this will take a lot of training for you to get used to, but if you're slapping that trigger, you're gonna have a slow rate of fire. So this does require training to get used to that trigger, which is very, 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 very mushy. So last part is the stock. The folding stock is great for transport. A lot of Japanese airsofters travel to airsoft by public transport. So being able to fold this up, put it into a small little compact bag is really nice because this thing is a long boy. However, it is not as QD as you would think. And if you're in the middle of battle or whatever, you gotta really push down, slap it out, and go from there. If you wanna go compact, really push it, and then go from there. So not ideal, not as fast as like a SIG or something like that. So that's kind of unfortunate. It is a little bit shorter because it's designed for Japanese people who on average are smaller than our Western counterparts. So the stock length is unadjustable and it kind of reaches around here. So if you're 6 feet tall like me, it's not gonna reach in your elbow pocket like this. So over time, as you use this stock with the impulse of the recoil, as well as attaching a sling and actually throwing down your rifle, causes a lot of play eventually to happen. And depending on how much you abuse your airsoft toy is how fast it will happen. In practice, it doesn't actually really affect gameplay or anything like that, but it is kind of disappointing for those people who have like that OCD kind of thing going on. Kind of annoying, but it is convenient and I'd still rather go for this because it looks like the Habana rifle, so it's really cool. So, final thoughts on the Type 89. It is definitely a collectible item, that's for sure. If you live in Japan like me, why do you not have a Type 89? It's, you can't really get these overseas. If you do find them, they are sold out quite quickly, but that doesn't mean it is the greatest thing on the planet even if it is from Tokyo Marui. It does have its design flaws due to the era that it was manufactured, it was based on. You're not gonna have a lot of customization options, especially for the gas version of this rifle. If you get the electric version of this rifle, Lilacs does make a handguard to make it look like a frickin' ACR or whatever the heck it is. It looks really cool. And they also have a bunch of different custom parts for it. But for the gas version, they do not have those options unless you go for other manufacturers who are making handguards for like 300, 400 a pop. Then you can make this thing really cool. But if not, you're gonna have to do a lot of jerry-rigging, just like they did in the Cold War. In terms of its performance, once I got it fixed, it's okay. You know, I wouldn't choose it over an M4. I wouldn't choose it over my AKM. But when it works and it's great. But when it doesn't, and you never know when it is, maybe I had a bad batch, it's kind of unreliable and I wouldn't want to use it. In terms of its optic mount options, again, you gotta get the proprietary rail mount and then you gotta use at least a real steel grade optic for it to not break. This optic here is pretty trash. Any kind of recoil will shut this thing off. Any kind of EOTech replica will shut this thing off. So I actually use my actual EOTech on this thing and it's fine. It won't lose zero. All that kind of stuff won't shut off on you. So that's another thing to consider when you get a gas rifle. In terms of customization for the internal parts, I think there is a hard recoil spring and a hard recoil buffer, but that's basically it. There isn't a lot of aftermarket support for this thing either. So again, it's more of a fun gun rather than something meta that you would bring into the field. Again, if you're looking at the size of this thing, it's 16 inches, 17, maybe, I don't even know. I'm gonna measure this thing, I'll write it down. But it's quite long, you know? Even if you shoulder the stock, it's still quite long. CQB, probably the best place to use gas blowbacks. This is gonna be a struggle. So like, it's a rifle that demands for you to use it when there's a lot of space, but that space is found outdoors and it doesn't perform that well outdoors unless you're in peak season. There are not that many content creators in the airsoft world making videos on this particular rifle, and I feel like it does have that value for me as a content creator making airsoft videos in Japan because it's just so rare. It's just a unique thing to see. But if I were in any financial trouble, this would probably be one of the first to consider getting rid of. Overall, it's damn cool. Look at this thing. It's cool. It's really cool. But anyway, guys, that's all I got for today. Thanks so much for watching. What do you guys think about the Type 89? Would it be something you'd want to use? And if you want to see more videos about airsoft in Japan, go ahead and click this video right here.